All right, so I'm going to go ahead and apologize for not having the booklets ready yet. I sent it off to several preacher friends a couple weeks ago, and there were a couple of changes and suggestions that they mentioned, and I liked the way that some of them brought it up. And you'll see it tonight, sort of the flow of how things are going to go. Mostly it's going to take just some rearranging. However, Word documents apparently don't let you rearrange very easily. We found that out the hard way. So we're working on getting that rearranged at this point. The way I want to approach this class, since we're talking about the names and attributes of God, I want to spend 1 week talking about the names. So 2 weeks ago, since we didn't have services or Bible study last Wednesday, 2 weeks ago we started talking about really two names given for God. Elohim, with that designation El at the beginning, also being a separate word. And then take those names and draw out the attributes from the names. So we sort of did that 2 weeks ago. We looked at the meaning of the names Elohim and El. El being the strong one, the mighty one. We looked at some scriptures where it points to God as a pillar. And it was using that same designation of El. And then Elohim typically going back to the Creator. We see that in the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when we're first introduced into who God is. That is the first name given to us about God is Elohim. So creation is part of that as well. But those speak more towards, I guess, characteristics of God than they do hard attributes. So what I want to do is take those names, Elohim and El, tonight, and look and draw some attributes of God. And really, there was one that just came to my mind, and we'll probably spend the majority of the time talking about it. One attribute that really comes to mind when we think about those names. So we talked about the name El being the strong one. We saw it in Exodus chapter 15 and verse 2. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my El, or God, as we translate it in English. And I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. And there's other passages, Numbers 23:22, Deuteronomy 7:9, and Mark chapter 15, verse 34, uses the Greek version of the Hebrew word El. Just a little bit of really information about that name El. It occurs more than 200 times in the Old Testament, including the compounds, so the Elohims, the El Shaddais, and things of that nature. Generic and Semitic name of God used by other cultures to refer to their gods. We looked at that 2 weeks ago, how the name El is also attributed to one of the goddesses back in the book of 1 Samuel. El is used in compound proper names such as Israel, which means wrestles with God, and Bethel, or house of God, and Elisha, God is salvation. So those are just some interesting things. It's also interesting to note that when David, or rather the psalmist, is giving what we oftentimes refer to as my God, my God. That designation for God there in the Psalms is El. And I found that very interesting to think that he refers to more the generic name of God when he cries out. And when you go to Jesus and he cries out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, depending on which which gospel you're reading from, Matthew designates it as Eli, which would be more of an Aramaic name. And then if you go to Mark's account, it designates it as Eloi, which is what scholars believe to be more of a Hebrew-Aramaic combination between the names. And when you think about who Matthew is written to, Matthew is written to primarily Jews. It's interesting that he uses El, the Aramaic form, or Eli, rather than just the Hebrew. And then when you go to Mark's account, you've got primarily a Roman background of who it's being written to. And he uses the Hebrew word. But Mark also goes in and explains what it means. So I find that interesting as well. We talked about Elohim being the creator, God being all-powerful creator of the universe. God knows all, he creates all, and is everywhere at all times. Elohim is the plural form of El. Some would say that Elohim, since it is plural, may denote parts of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I don't know if that's the case or not. It's not really revealed to us, but it is in plural form. And this name is usually associated with God in relation to his creation. Elohim is also used to refer to false gods and even human judges. So can you think of any area of biblical study that is not affected by our understanding of God? I see some head nods. No. When we go into a biblical study, studying the Bible, everything is centered around who God is, what God expects of us. So we have to have an understanding of who God is. If we don't understand who God is, we're basically just reading a history book at that point. There's no meaning to it without any understanding of God. What areas of our life are directly influenced by our knowledge of God? All of it. Everything. Depending on how we think about God, how we understand God, determines how we live, how we read the Bible, how we worship, how we praise him. Every single aspect of our lives is dictated by that understanding of God. So what are some ways we try to make God in our own image? We'll start with that question first. Okay. It could be. It could be. I think God acts in this way or that way. I think God does this or he doesn't do that. I think God's character is like this. I think he does this or does not do this.
I've heard people lie before and they'll say, well, God will understand.
Okay.
They lie to get out of an uncomfortable scenario and then they expect God to overlook that.
Yeah. So they create God in their own image by making excuses for themselves. And since that excuse is acceptable to them, well, obviously it's acceptable to God. What else? Okay. Yeah. So we then become the creator, and God becomes the created in our mind.
I had an elderly person tell me recently that when they had said something that was not appropriate, that you know how old people, when they get old, they say things, or like that was an excuse for being able to talk to people like that.
And for many people, that excuse works.
I've always wanted to print up a T-shirt that says, "No, it's not okay to say that just because you're old."
Dana.
My job just about every day. No, I had a profanity like tirade against me because when the older lady wanted to not act as wisdom, I directly called her out. And told her, I expect better of her. That's not gonna fly. And so
Yeah.
I flew out of the ultimately, but I think she was better today, so I would like to take maybe some of that.
Mhm. So when we create God in our own image, in what ways is that practiced like idolatry?
Well, an idol's a made-up God with made-up rules and
Yeah.
made-up ways.
Mm-hmm.
Native abilities.
So I think there's a lot of good that can come from studying the attributes of God. And drawing from those names, El and Elohim, there are some, there's probably several attributes that we can draw out from those. But one that I believe is really drawn out from the name El or Elohim is the transcendence of God. What does transcendence mean? I don't know if I have that. Yeah. What does transcendence mean? Okay, exceeding, above, beyond. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, how is it used in relation to God? Yeah. Everything. So God exceeds everything. He goes above everything. He goes beyond everything. And that there's a key phrase that Mike used there, above, that's going to come very important when we talk about transcendence. So the Webster Dictionary defines transcendence as exceeding usual limits or surpassing. So it's that going above, going beyond, far surpassing. Another one put it as being beyond the limits of all possible experience and knowledge. And I like that as well. Incomprehensible, I think is a good way to put it.
There's a statement, my ways are higher than your ways.
Exactly. And that goes to speak to the transcendence of God. So we see this in several different ways in God. We see the transcendence of God in Him being the creator. Elohim as the creator speaks to His transcendence. Well, look over in 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. And if somebody would read verses 11 through 16 for us of 1 Timothy. So here we have Paul, and he goes through all of these things about how needing to abstain from evil, needing to abstain from sin. And all of that boils down to basically verses 15 and 16, where he starts to talk about who? Talks about God. And what does he talk about God? What's he talking about God? King of kings, Lord of lords. Sovereign.
He alone has immortality, so he's eternal.
He's eternal. And he dwells in the unapproachable light. And no man can see him. So there's this little discourse of praise to God right after Paul gets done talking about abstaining from sin, fleeing from evil, and things of that nature. Well, what's the point of that? Why talk about the essence or these characteristics or attributes of God?
Because he's telling us in verse 14 that we're supposed to keep the commandments without spot. So if we know he's this wonderful, almighty God and he's created us, then we owe it to him to keep his commandments.
Yeah.
Obey them.
We're accountable to him. He's set the world in motion. He put humans on the earth.
Yeah.
With the idea of being accountable.
He possesses immortality. Well, is that something that we as humans possess? No. So
80 years. What a cry. Even a century.
So does that transcend its creation, the Creator's creation? Yeah. So his immortality, it transcends creation. It goes above, beyond, it surpasses creation. Almost to the point where it is incomprehensible. Because we are built on this time frame. We have a start and an end. We understand that. We count from 1 to 1,000. That has a beginning and that has an end. We can do the same thing with our life. We can count up the years of our life. We know that at some point it's going to come to an end. We don't know that exact day or that time or how many years it's going to be, how many hours, how many minutes, or anything like that. But we understand that there comes a start and an end because we see it in the world around us. So we can't even fathom the thought of a place in which time does not exist. It's incomprehensible. It's just a line that just keeps going, and there was no start point and no end point. So God transcends time and space. Why? Because he created time and space. He transcends his creation because of his immortality. He dwells in that unapproachable light. Look over in Romans chapter 1. Romans, the first chapter, verses 21 through 25. Romans chapter 1, if somebody wants to read verses 21 through 25 for us.
Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God to an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God, is that it?
Through verse 25.
25. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness and the lusts of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
So here we have a group of people who have gone to worship what? creation. And how do they go about doing that?
They made images.
They made images. And what brought that about?
Their foolish hearts were darkened.
They forgot God. Their foolish hearts are darkened. They did not honor Him. Why would somebody go to worship something that is created? Yeah, you project your own rules and your own laws on that, whatever that idol may be. Why else might somebody go to that form of worship?
Something they could see and touch.
Something they can see and touch. I like verse 24 where it says God gave them over to the lust of their own hearts, to the impurity. That's really what idolatry boils down to. It's basically a selfishness. I want to do it the way that I want to do it.
And connected with that is the idea that they worship something that makes no requirement of them. It can't, because it can't speak, it can't think, it can't talk. It's whatever they make it to do.
Yeah.
Like Dad was saying. It requires nothing of them.
So what can be implied from Elohim, or the Creator, transcending His creation? What can be applied or implied specifically to us based off of that? Him being the Creator, transcending that creation. Okay, a level of fear. Fear in the sense of respect as we see it in the Bible. Fear in the sense of we are not in control, especially for those who do not believe in the Elohim. What else? Okay, He has the authority. So since He is the Creator and He has created us, He has authority over that creation. So therefore, He has the authority to dictate what it is I do, what it is that I need to be saying, how it is I need to be dressing, how I need to appear, what I need to be doing. All of those things are dictated by the authority of God, in the essence that He transcends His creation. He surpasses His creation, because none of us can create anything to the level and the extent in which God created everything we see, everything we know. We also see God transcends, or Elohim, He transcends because of His holiness. We know that God is holy because Hosea chapter 11, verses 9 through 12. We'll just take a second to look at that real quick. There in verse 9, it says, the Holy One among you. And then going all the way down to verse 12, the faithful Holy One. So God is holy. Psalm 99 also speaks to the holiness of God. In verse 3, holy is He. And then in verse 9, for holy is the Lord our God. Going back to verse 5 as well, holy is He. Well, there's a lot of verses that talk about the holiness of God. How does God's holiness, though, speak to His transcendence? I guess first we need to define what holiness is. What does it mean to be holy?
Pure.
Okay.
Purity, He's pure, completely pure, therefore no sin.
Okay.
So then He transcends us.
So there's the purity aspect. So he's set apart or set aside from sin. What else? How else would you define holy? I kind of gave you the answer in that, but
Well, I guess if you mean being sanctified, I mean, set apart like you said, if that's what you mean.
yeah. So set apart. Really, holiness in its essence means to be set apart. So, with that being said, how does God's being set apart, how does his holiness speak to his transcendent nature? Okay, so he's in a totally different realm. He transcends in the sense that he is set apart from his creation. But also, is he set apart from his creation? Doesn't he have a desire to have a relationship with us? So in the same sense, he's set apart in the fact that he can also be separate and with at the same time. And he provided a way for that to happen. So his nature becomes part of his holiness that transcends all of his creation. What else? And Carrie basically alluded to it when we talked about defining it. He's set apart from sin, pure. So we have his nature, we also have his essence that are set apart. Look over in 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. If somebody wants to read verses 15 and 16 for us. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16.
But as he who calls you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy.
All right, so here we have a charge, and what's the charge for us as his creation and as Christians? Be holy. How can we be holy? Thinking about the definition, being set apart. Okay, live our lives different from the world. We're set apart from the ways of the world. What else?
Maybe think about the verse where it says, God cannot lie.
Okay.
You know, and people lie
Yeah.
every day. But it's impossible for God to lie. He's so much holier and above us.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to strive to be that way.
Yeah.
Every day we need to try to be better, to be holier, to separate ourselves more from the world.
Yeah.
And the way the world thinks and acts. And
Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Set apart. Your mind is set apart from the rest of the world. It's renewed. It's saying, the lust of the flesh, the things of the world, those things I'm putting off. I'm putting off the old self. I'm putting on the new self. That's how I'm going to be set apart. Well, what can be implied from that charge?
That we can know how to be holy.
We can know how to be holy. What else?
That there is a way to be holy.
There is a way to be holy. And if there's a way to be holy, what does that mean for us as Christians in our lives? We got to find it. We're constantly striving to be set apart from this world. We're constantly striving to display that unapproachable light to the world. Because we're trying to show the light that the Father has given us. Not only can we see his transcendence in his creation, in his holiness, but we also see in his exalted, the way that he is exalted by his creation. Look over in Micah chapter 6 and verse 6. We're not going to take the time to really turn over there just because of time at this point. But basically, Micah here is talking about God, and he refers to him as the God on high. Bowing down before God to the God on high. Well, the term exalted means to be higher. When we think about God on high and how often it's used, really the height aspect throughout Scripture when referring to God, how often do we think about that exaltation of God? You also see it in Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 1. I didn't change the verse on that because that's still Micah 6 verse 6. But it also refers to God being exalted. And there's other places that you can go to as well. He is the high and exalted one, Isaiah 57 verse 15. The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high, Isaiah 33 verse 5. Moses said, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, Exodus 15 verse 1. The Lord is called the highest one in Daniel 7:18, 22, 25, 27. He is the most high, Numbers 24:16, as well as the others if you want to jot those down. The most high God in Daniel 5:18 and verse 21, as well as Mark 5:7 and Acts 16:17. His dwelling place is said to be in heaven. And when we think about him being in heaven, well, where do we think about heaven being? Above. So 1 Kings 8 verse 30, Psalm 2:4, 115:3, 123:1, and Matthew 6 verse 9. God says of himself, I dwell on a high and lofty place. He is in the highest, Luke 2:14, and the Lord's throne is in heaven, Psalm 11 verse 4. So we see all of this height and exaltation of God. So in what sense is God exalted?
And it's his power. His power overcomes any God that man can think of himself.
Okay.
He can overthrow man's. In Daniel, the king believed in many gods, but he realized that there's no works of the Father in heaven that exceeds anything.
Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar, even though being a polytheist, he saw God as really the highest God, even though he believed in the other gods or the other idols that they were worshiping at that time. So what other senses is God exalted? Okay, every sense. So he's exalted by his power, and Charlie talked about this as well, in the fact that he did create everything. And inside that power of creation, he transcends everything else. His ways are not our ways. If somebody was to create any god by their own imagination, he would not be the God that we read about in the Bible. So are these verses speaking just to the fact that God dwells above? No. They're not talking about God just being above us somewhere up in the universe and the heavens. That's not what's being talked about when we read about the God on high. What's being talked about is his power, his might, his strength.
Gives credence too, that he has the power, or he has the ability to destroy the world as we see it.
Yeah.
As he says, as the scriptures teach.
Mhm.
It's kind of deep. And he will not destroy himself.
Yeah.
And he can draw people to him that will not be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
We can tell somebody, I'll meet you there tomorrow, and we may definitely mean that when we say it, but we really have no control over whether we'll be able to do that or not. We could not make it past 1 minute after it coming out of our breath, but God can, and what he says will happen, will happen. And so he's exalted in everything that he does, because what he speaks is truth, and it's going to happen.
I mean, you can swear an oath by yourself. Then getting higher than that. So,
What God says he means, and what God means he says. And what he says comes true. That's what it boils down to. There is always 100% certainty in what God says. How do we exalt God in our lives then? Okay, put him first. What else?
By giving him the glory and when we talk to other people, that we give him the glory of we're here because of God. I'm blessed with the things that I have because of God.
So recognition of my place in this universe. Charlie?
We act on his authority.
We act on his authority.
So that's our place.
Yeah. So because he transcends us in the fact that he created us, and the fact that he is holy, and he transcends us in the fact that he is exalted, gives him authority over us. And that's what can be implied when we think about him being exalted. That's what we can apply in our lives. If we're going to exalt God, to put him far above, superior, surpassing, we're putting him first in our lives. And not just first, he becomes our life. He is that much more superior. God is worthy to be exalted in my life because he transcends. His ways, they're higher than mine. His ways expose my false hopes. They expose my selfish desires and my sinful ways. God is my life. He doesn't just come first in my life, he becomes my life. And outside of him, there is no life. We exalt God by making him everything to us. He's higher than us, higher than his creation, far above, far surpassing everything that we can see, that we can think of, or that we can even imagine. Elohim in the Spirit, we recognize God as a spirit. We'll quickly go through this last point. John 4, verse 24. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Speaking about the nature of God, we know that his spirit is eternal, is it not? He possesses immortality. So he's not made like us, but he also is made like us, because when we go back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 25 and 26, or no, 26 and 27, it talks about how God made us in his image. So if God has made us in his image and his likeness, we also possess, in a sense, a similar spirit. So how did the pagans view their deities? However they saw fit. So did those deities, did they really transcend the creation or those who created them? No.
There's an awful lot of temples robbed. Alexander the Great.
The gods that the pagans made up, they were more just powerful beings than they were transcendent beings. The people understood those pagan idols. They had idols for the sun, idols for the moon. They understood the way in which they moved, how they worked, how they were organized. Do we understand God in that same way? No. He is so transcendent, so surpassing, so far above, out of our realm of imagination that we cannot comprehend him to its fullest extent. And we also cannot find a way to describe him in just one single word, one single paragraph, or even one single book. Do the majority of those who claim to be Christians see God as transcendent?
No, because they change God to be who they want him to be.
Okay? They change them to who he wants them to be. So if they're changing God to be what they want God to be, God is no longer transcendent, because his nature, his essence is no longer objective, it is rather subjective. It can change based off of a person. So understanding the nature of God is critical, because those who understand God's transcendence, they're going to live and act like people under a God who transcends everything. Questions, comments, concerns?
There's one thing I've been thinking about from time to time, since there's been a couple of deaths in my family. We die, and the scriptures teach that God has formed the spirit and the soul, that it can exist. Abraham still is, David still is, as the apostles taught. Across how many centuries, or how many thousands of years, the person that lived on this earth is waiting for the final day of judgment. And our being is waiting there. God is with us to, that we wait. We wait until his will is accomplished. So that is, I think that a difference. I think that's the only thing that, only thing I can explanation of.
You know, I was watching a video at one point, and it was two people arguing back and forth about the oldest person that was named in the Bible. And one gave their explanation and name, the other gave their explanation and name. And I was sitting there thinking, y'all are arguing about something that really is trivial in nature and holds no bearing on spirituality. But both of y'all are actually wrong, because the oldest person to live mentioned in the Bible is Jesus. Jesus transcends in that way. Because, yes, even though he died, he's still living today. And that makes him 2,000 years old.
The definition